All right, is this the turning point? Is this the spark that LIV Golf needed? Golf Digest recently spoke about Anthony Kim's win, saying it was an authentic moment billions of dollars couldn't buy and one they couldn't manufacture no matter how much they spent. But even more importantly, it shows the importance of official world golf rankings, with Anthony Kim jumping over 600 spots in the official world rankings, down from 847th all the way up to spot 203. And on top of that, we saw an outpouring of support for Anthony Kim that seemed to bridge the divide. It came from both sides, both on the PGA side as well as on the LIV side. Everyone seemed to gel together, and so many people came out and said even though they hadn't been watching LIV, they had to tune into this one with the incredible comeback story that has already been labeled one of the greatest comeback stories in the history of the game. So it really begs the question, does this really move the needle for LIV Golf, who undoubtedly has been having a tough year so far in 2026 with the loss of some big names like Brooks Koepka, Patrick Reed heading back to the PGA Tour, and we've talked about how tough those optics have been on the league. So this could be a huge shifting point that brings a lot of attention that otherwise LIV possibly was lacking. We're going to dive into all that in just a second, but first, of course, we want to thank this week's sponsor, Titleist. And guys, every golfer has more in them around the green. You just need the tools and the trust to pull off the exact shots that you envision. And the best part is that the SM11 lineup features 6 unique grind options built for every style of play and every shot you face. And personally, I recently switched to the S grind for my 53 and 59 degree wedges, which has given me a ton more versatility around the greens. And all grinds feature that new Vokey spin system, which has a razor-like face texture, provides even more reliable spin control, and the deeper grooves give you that consistency in the rough and wet conditions. So what will SM11 bring to your game? Find out more. Go to Vokey.com. And I would say if you can, schedule a Vokey fitting. That's really how I got my personal bounce and grinds dialed in. And that's when you really unlock the full power of these incredible wedges. So definitely give that a look. Now, Mike, we're going to get into like the whole timeline. We're going to talk about exactly, because I was thinking about this, for us who've been watching this for years and years, we know the backstory and what it really means with Anthony Kim. I would imagine there's probably some newer, golf fans, even some younger, viewers who might not know, like, who is this guy? Like, why is it so important? Like,
right.
Why he's so big, and why was this such a story that so many of us attached to? So we'll talk about the full timeline, but importantly, we posed this question, and we're going to dive into some of your responses, because I think hearing from some of you guys, this is a question we had posted on Facebook, and I saw an outpouring of responses, and interestingly, a lot of people owning it and saying, I'm not a LIV fan. I've never really even watched, and I'm paraphrasing. Right. I'm going to read some of your quotes in a second, but I've never watched LIV, and I had to watch this. It was compelling, not only for who it was, but the fashion and the way in which he won. And we're also going to break down the numbers. You're now looking at an event, in Australia, LIV, Adelaide. It was one of the most attended golf events. I mean, you saw the pictures of the crowds.
Yeah, they figured it out over there.
Incredible, right? And this even has some people calling for even more golf in Australia. There's people saying, like, why, like tennis, don't they have a major, in Australia? And it just shows you that LIV definitely has tapped into something, and especially this idea of being more international and bringing the game to other places. And for as much as a lot of people have kind of, in a lot of ways, criticized LIV of saying, like, using the kind of the phrase grow the game more as a marketing thing than reality. Well, I'll tell you the truth. This is kind of proof of reality that they are growing the game in a market that it was wildly underserved by the PGA Tour. So we've got a lot, but this week's, question of the week presented by Flecha Azul is an ultra clean, additive-free tequila crafted from pure blue agave. And like I said, you gotta give it a try if you haven't already. I love that reposado. But the question of the week, and this is the same one that we post to you guys on Facebook, is: was Anthony Kim's win ultimately the spark that LIV Golf needed? Or, was this just a one and done feel good story about an individual? It really makes you wonder, does that cross over? Did that bring people in? Again, like I said, Gonna dive into some of you guys' responses, but for your own self, drop them down in the comments below. Let us know. What do you think? Was this ultimately even bigger than Anthony Kim and a turning point in a lot of ways for a league that's had, as I said, a tough start to the year, optic wise, losing some key names?
If you think about it, Anthony Kim might be like a couple of wins away. If he stays hot and he starts going on what golfers normally do, they get hot and they go on this winning streak. If he's able to do that, could you see this guy at the Masters? Like, could he get there?
100%. I mean, look at how much he jumped up.
Exactly.
206.
So now LIV gets a story into the Masters about Anthony Kim, and that becomes a grand story on the grandest stage of golf. That has to be good for LIV. I'm not saying this is ultimately going to jump viewership because he won. I don't think so. But I think growing the name of LIV, through things like that, seeing that happen, you got Patrick Reed, the Brooks Koepka backstory going into the Augusta. That's going to help too. So,
and even it being beyond that, like I said, that story that money couldn't buy. You know, a lot of people said, like, sure, guys like John Rahm and Bryson DeChambeau racking up wins on LIV, was important for like their fans coming over and watching it there. But you think like with those guys, it's tied to these heavy signing bonuses. You don't really have that with Anthony Kim. This is a guy who, don't forget, and we'll talk more about it in a second, he struggled quite a bit when he first returned to golf. Yeah. And
getting knocked on.
It seemed like a story that was dead before it even got running, But let's talk about that timeline. So importantly, and we'll kind of fly through this pretty quick because there's a lot of nuances to it, but the key points are way back, it was around 2006 is when he first turned pro. If you were around and a golf fan at the time, you know that he was widely considered the PGA Tour's rising star. We're talking phenom status.
Yep.
He breaks out in 2008, wins 2 PGA Tour events. He was on the U.S. Ryder Cup that year. He was electric to watch. Even remember from a fashion standpoint, the belts, the AK
belts.
It almost got this cultural like bigger than golf moment around him being just so young. And he shot up to world number 6 at just 23 years old, and this is
the next Tiger by some,
right. Yep. And you're talking about a time when Tiger was later in his career, he wasn't winning quite as much at that time. And golf is looking for who's the next big superstar.
Right.
And this is why, like I said, I don't want to downplay just how big this is. And I want to promote across this point if people not, if you weren't around that time of place as a golf fan, you may not realize like COVID brought a lot of people into the game that weren't there. Like this was 10 years before that. They don't realize just how big this guy really was and why it became such a story and just compelling and just grabbed the attention of so many people when he just flat out disappeared. So he's on the tour for a couple of years. He won again in 2010, the Shell Houston Open. That was his last win. But what happened was he starts to really battle out injuries, and the injuries are kind of stacking up one on top of each other. And, we don't even have the full picture. Like he would later do interviews about how many surgeries he underwent to get through some of the injuries. But like, we don't have the full picture because, like I said, he disappeared. It was in 2012. He just, like as quickly as he came onto the golf scene, he was gone again. Just gone, like a complete ghost. And what happened when that occurred was that it led to quite a few big rumors. The where is Anthony Kim? But like what we saw at the time was, and I still don't know if it was ever fully substantiated how much of this was truth versus how much it wasn't. But there were a lot of people who had surmised that he had taken out and effectively benefited from a huge insurance payout where he basically, the insurance was against him not being able to complete his career because of the injuries. It was something like $10 million that it was awarded, but he was not able to play professional golf for 10 years, for a full decade. And again, this is like a rumor mill type of thing, whatever. But during that time, and this is what we found out about later, like, because again, like it's hard unless you were there to fully grasp this, but it was it was unknown where he had gone. He disappeared from the spotlight to the point where I remember if there were spottings of him,
Mhm.
it would become
Yeah,
it would circulate around social media,
absolutely.
like, instantly, like, it was or even people who looked like him.
Right.
Is that Anthony Kim? Like, when I say he disappeared, I mean no interviews, no nothing. He was gone
Gone.
from
Witness
the spot.
protection.
Yeah,
Gone. Yeah.
it was
It's
very
very
witness
similar to that.
protection. So we're only now finding out as he returns. So in 2024, he comes back to Live Golf, and
Mhm.
this is the first time he's returning to professional golf, but it's also the first time he's returning to the spotlight. And we've seen Anthony Kim that looks different,
Mhm.
wildly different. He's a guy who he's much older now, and there's some clear, visible effects of what he had been through.
Battled the
And
drugs.
this is where he starts opening up and telling
Yeah.
you, like, he had dramatically faced addiction. I'm going to talk about some of his quotes that he said about addiction in just a second. But when I talk about that, I mean, like, literally, there were, some of the quotes he talked about, like, how can you play in majors when you're running to the porta potty every couple of holes? Like, really in the depths of addiction, and even talking about potentially wanting to take his own life, and every day just kind of making that decision. I mean, as deep down as it can go.
Yep.
So, and I don't know whether the full story of whether the surgeries and this and obviously the recovery and the drugs that are part of that were what led to the addictions, but
It
we're talking, quite an uphill battle that he fought.
As you're going through this, I'm thinking about how much of the weight of the world must be off his shoulders at this point,
Yeah.
right? You got to battle, I think, like, the career that I once could have had, like, all that regret or whatever the case may be. What would have been like Scotty Scheffler win style, whatever. Am I ever gonna do this again? He comes back and wins. He's got to be feeling
And the
damn
personal
good.
validation to have gone through the depths of hell of addiction, and then being able to come back and prove not only to others. I think you get
Yeah.
to a certain point, it really only matters to yourself.
Sure.
And
Mm.
proving to yourself that I can do it, and all the hard work of getting sober and all that type of stuff was worth it. So
Not to mention, not to cut you off, but by the way, he was just recently pulled into the Aces to fill
yes.
Patrick Reed's void. So I don't know if that added a boost to confidence that he had some trust in him going into this,
Right.
but I'm sure the guy's beaming with confidence now.
Yeah, and like I said, following that timeline, so he returns to Live in 2024, but here's where it almost felt like the comeback story was dead in the water. As you mentioned earlier, finishing in dead last place.
Yep.
He's kind of like he's a plug-in. He's not quite right with the team officially yet, and it just felt like the story that could have been so big for Live fizzled before it had the chance to really go anywhere. Then again, we talked about earlier this year, you had guys like, Brooks Koepka and then Patrick Reed leave the league. But when Reed left, it left an opening on Dustin Johnson's Four Aces team. And this is where Anthony Kim steps in. He takes that spot. Dustin Johnson wisely, now very wisely, to bring him onto his team. It was a smart decision. And he has his huge dramatic fashion win just last weekend. But when I say dramatic fashion, you got to even think about what he did. It wasn't just a career comeback story. It was compelling golf of that day. He shot a final round 63. Look at the rest of that leaderboard. He chased down and beat John Rahm, Hatton, DeChambeau. He had to beat the best. This is not a scenario where it's like, it's an alternate field event,
Yeah,
and
right.
you don't know any of the names. Like, look at
He's
the
got some
names that
big
he
boy shoes.
beat, and his putting
His
was lights out. It was
It
incredible.
his putting was everything, man. Even Smiley Kaufman, who's PGA Tour side, he put something out saying, let me know when the
Right.
highlight reel of Anthony Kim drops of his putting. To a highlight reel of him putting, it was insane.
And that's what I'm saying. It really did show an outpouring of support on both sides. So
Yep.
just quick stats, like I said, on that win. As I mentioned, he beats out John Rahm, Bryson DeChambeau, 9 under. So no bogeys in his final round, 9 birdies, 63, on a day where a lot of the other guys were shooting around level par, which just shows you the field. It wasn't like it was playing super easy. He just managed to make it work. He also, important stats for him, he takes home a $4 million purse from winning that event. And as I mentioned earlier, he jumps up from 847th to 203rd in the official World Golf rankings, which again tells you how important it was for LIV to get those
Yeah,
official World Golf rankings, right? I mean, we talked about it last week. Like, originally there was like this question mark, is like, is it enough, points? Because we did the whole debate where only down to 10th place gets points, and the point numbers are on par with what would be like an alternate field event for the PGA Tour, but still this 20 to
But guys are
25
benefiting.
points. This shows you in hard numbers the benefit to jump 600 spots and now be in the top 200.
It's crazy.
Right. It's important.
Yeah, he's not far away again from those majors, those invitations, things like that. So I think the World Golf ranking points were pretty darn good. They're showing immediately.
Exactly. That shows you just how much it can change a person's
Elvis
life.
Last week, that other guy, the new rookie, now Anthony Kim.
It shows you can change your life and you can win your way into majors. Now, after, let's just talk really quickly again, context of like just how tough it was. I mentioned earlier, I'd give you some quotes. On Instagram, Anthony Kim gave a bigger picture of just how much he had struggled with addiction. He said, I was barely physically able to walk into rehab, needing assistance from my sober coach as my body was shutting down. Not long before this moment, I contemplated ending my life every day for almost 2 decades, even while playing on the PGA Tour. When to the public, I seemed happy while struggling with addiction and mental illness. This post isn't to tell everyone to go get sober, but for people who are letting addiction ruin their lives, as I did, that you can turn your life around. Then in another interview, he talked more about what his personal motivation was. And he said, I promised myself when I was in the ER for 6 days that I would do everything I could to make a difference, to show my daughter that it's never too late to keep trying. And that, to me, like, that kind of says everything. And you saw that moment, like when he knew he was going to win. The final putt was a tap in. He was cool. He even got the crowd going. He taps it in, and then his daughter runs out. And
it was an electric moment.
Just a feel good moment. But it just shows you just what how much that addiction had really truly gripped him. And in his interviews after the fact, he talked about, just putting it on himself, just relying on himself, and no other outside forces. So you can just really tell, as much as this became a worldwide sensation, it was a very personal battle for him.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately, the more fandom that AK gets, the more fandom LIV's going to get. So I think as people love to latch on to his story, like you said, the younger generation who doesn't know him, learning about him, maybe people going through the same stuff that he's gone through that are also into golf, maybe they'll kind of latch onto it, and who knows, maybe it will ultimately lift the love for LIV.
And like I said, it was, if nothing else, it was a come together moment around Anthony Kim. And as you mentioned earlier, some of the different outpouring of support that really came from what was oftentimes more LIV critics. There was, everyone was on social media making statements, and everywhere else, we saw just an incredible outpouring of support for what he did.
Sure.
And I saw very little on the other side of anyone saying, that it wasn't a big deal. I did not see that. And I thought that was positive to see. And in a lot of ways, I feel like as a fan of golf, you want to see these moments where it's a little bit less of a divide and a little more coming together. And he gave us that moment. So we're going to pause there. We're going to do a quick word from our sponsor, and then we're going to want to come back. I want to, like I said, I want to read some of your responses to that question of what this means for LIV, but I want to dive in that even deeper. I want to go beyond Anthony Kim and talk about what this meant for LIV, and also meeting the moment, because it happened at their Australian event, and we're seeing every year growth in the attendance of that event, and just seeing in full display the crowds. It just tells you that this is something for LIV, and it just shows you that this is a momentum that could very much carry forward. So let's do a word from our sponsor there, and we'll come right back to it.
Regarded as one of the most successful product franchises in golf, the Pro SL from FootJoy has set high standard for performance spikeless golf shoes. The iconic shoe is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, 2026, and has been completely reinvented. 30% lighter with improved comfort and an all-new traction pattern and new athletic fit. This generation version of Pro SL adds an already incredible lineup of performance footwear from FootJoy, from the modern classics like the Premier, which we're always talking about, that Premier series, and the traditions in that series, as well as the athletic styles of Hyperflex and Quantum. And if you're watching the show, guys, I have them in my hand. I'm showing you, like, look at the colorways. They're able to get these cool looking patterns, and totally reinvented shoe from their last edition of Pro SL. They really knocked it out of the park with this. I can't wait to get on the golf course with them. And FootJoy develops golf shoes for whatever you need, guys. So start your journey towards better golf by finding the right shoe for you at footjoy.com.
All right. So like I said, talking about this being bigger than Anthony Kim, but also a moment for the individual story to almost force people to like tune in, and you're gonna see in some of your own responses from this question that we posed on social media, a lot of people are admitting like, I haven't watched a live event in 3 years and I tuned in.
Yeah.
And that's even jumping across the divide of the tough time change, right? So when we look at that event in general, I keep saying this. I've said this a million times here on the show that I think what LIV really needs to figure out in order for its success is they continue to look to be this global international league. And I understand the model. I understand what they're trying to do is really tap into these markets that were underserved by the PGA Tour. You have to look at Australia, this Adelaide event, as your case study. How do I duplicate that in other places?
Yeah.
Because not only has they seen, like I said, tremendous crowds, it's also seen year-over-year growth. So interestingly, this year's event, it drew more than 115,000 fans across the week. And to put that in perspective, that puts it right on par with your average PGA Tour event.
Sure.
There's outliers, no doubt. You look at the waste management, like that majors nobody touches. Like, you're talking about like 400,000 people. I think the highest ever, and I think they've backed it down since, there was like 700,000 people.
Jeez.
In I think it was 2018. I think it was last year that they did numbers for that. They published the numbers, but in and out, week over week, you're seeing about that many. So like the crowds are rivaling what you get at a PGA Tour event. But more importantly, like I said, it's not a one and done. It's not like everyone knew that was going to happen and they all showed up to see Anthony Kim win. Anthony Kim, I saw something going into it. His chances of winning on Sunday were minuscule.
Yeah.
Like if you had put a couple bucks on him, you made
like 5
money.
strokes behind or something.
Yeah. And to go 9 under and charge from behind and win that thing. It's not like a bunch of people showed up just to see history happen. That's not what it was. You're seeing year-over-year growth. So you saw, if you go look at each year, 94,000 attendees in 2024, 102,000 in 2025, and 115,000 in 2026. So we're seeing year-over-year growth. It's also, like I said, you look at the crowds and just seeing the pictures from that day, and it's just like, I would say LIV haters would have to come out and say, like, I can't deny that. I can't deny what's in front of my face. That was a huge event with a lot of people, and it then made it the biggest golf event in the history of Australia with that many attendees. So
that's crazy.
It's incredible.
The outlier, I mean, Australia has a huge golf fan base. A place like Riyadh does not, unless they're going to try to grow it. They're trying to grow the game there. That's why maybe some of the stops are to grow the game. Some of the stops are places you can't have Australia stops everywhere. Could you have the championship in Australia at Adelaide? I don't know what the seasonality, temperature is, time of year, whatever, how that works out. But I don't know. That seems like a better venue than here in the United States because of, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, look, and it also plays to the fact that we've said, like, this becoming a very personal decision of who now goes to LIV and who doesn't, beyond a monetary decision. And you see, it's a great fit for somebody like Cam Smith, who talked about like being Australian and wanting to be able to like have a little bit more with his own nationality there. And it just shows, like you said, like, I think that you can't just find a whole lot of Australias. I think it's smart to like kind of look for those untapped markets. So those places that are underserved. I still think there are some that are out there. I definitely do. I think the PGA Tour having, 1 or 2 events in Canada every year, rarely, like South Africa, you think is another spot.
Yeah.
There are currently big golf locations that don't get professional events that I think you can do, but you're also right. There's some that's going to take years. It's starting from the ground up. There are some markets that are not traditional golf markets that you need to develop it almost from scratch.
You think Jason Day would ever go to LIV and join that team? Think about it. Later in the career, he's got maybe that Malbon exposure to LIV. Perfect.
Anthony Kim was another Malbon guy. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it could be. I'm not saying that Jay Day, I mean, he's got a growing YouTube channel that seems to be working for him. It could be very Bryson-esque, Just put a pin in that.
Yeah, I mean,
We'll see.
that's definitely the heritage there, but I think I think of Jason Day, and I think he's just so established here, living in
Yeah,
Ohio
no
with his
question.
family.
No question.
His wife is American. She's from
Mhm.
here. I think it would be a little bit of a different uprooting for him, but it just makes you like continue to think like when you think about who the prospects are to go to live. I think it's going to be these guys with some sort of international component because
100%.
we did see it go the other way. Kepka, Reed, these are, Americans
Yeah,
who, came
coming
back
back.
because it wasn't a good fit for them. But as I said before, I wanted to read some of you guys' responses because I think it's telling, and I appreciate everyone's honesty.
Yep. Mhm.
There's a lot of people in here that were very honest that whether they were a Live fan or they weren't. And like I said, our kind of goal, like each week, is just to kind of show both sides of it, give voice to both of them, and not take a stance or a real like draw a line in the stand of like we think one is better than the other. I do think that there is a good fit for everyone, and I think this serves on that international component. So, one comment and again, this is in response to the question: do we think that Anthony Kim's win was ultimately going to give the spark that Live Golf has been waiting for? Trey Thomas said no, so he's saying no. I don't think it's a spot, but I'll say that I hardly watch or even pay much attention to Live besides when they come to Indiana, and I pretty much watched all of it down to the stretch last night. One of the best and most compelling final rounds that I've seen in quite a while on any tour.
Wow.
And I think that's interesting. Like he's
Yeah.
saying, like, no, like this is not going to be enough for me to watch it week in and week out, but it's saying it's undeniably compelling golf, and it
Mhm.
was exciting finish. I saw another one that, on the other side of this about what would this make you watch more? He said yes, basically indicating that it would be the spark that Liv has been waiting for. And I'll kind of sum it up. He just basically says he personally hadn't watched. Imagine he's saying here's Liv in over 3 years, but he said it was probably one of the most viewed events online. And he said even if regular supporters and fans on the PGA are watching what he
Mhm.
did.
Yep.
Also another one here. He said absolutely. I'll be watching more of the Kim show on Live. Like this is where it's obvious. Like one player can be the catalyst to bring people in. To watch an entire tour.
100%.
And then who knows? Keith Miller said, I haven't watched a round of Live before. This event was very exciting with great golf, and the crowds of 115,000 attendance is amazing. I will watch more now. So I mean,
Maybe. Okay.
right. These are people who are admitting that they weren't Live fans and they're going to watch it even more. So, like I mentioned earlier, I want to hear what you guys think. Like, weigh in below. Do you agree with that? And be honest. Were you a Live fan? Or were you not watching it regularly before this? Did you tune in, or does it ultimately not matter to you at all? Do you feel like that's not enough for you to watch it? And I think one thing that I saw like there were tons more comments and responses than that. And I think one of the common threads I also saw was that some people with a desire to watch it, but ultimately we're not getting across that line because of the huge time change. There were some people who mentioned,
Yeah.
without
Right.
that time change, I would, I would say it. I'll read one more. Dan Nangle said, I'm not much of a Live fan, but I will say that I stayed up watching it because it's a remarkable comeback story. What he went through all those years to come back and actually beat two of the top players in the world. I don't care what tour you're on. You shoot 9 under par in the final round. His putting was ridiculous. Give credit where credit's due. Absolutely amazing.
Mm.
So, I
Yep.
mean, yeah, it's I can understand where a lot of people are coming
Absolutely.
from on this. So let us know your own comments below. And like I said, we'll continue to watch this and we'll see, does the Anthony Kim story continue to unfold? Will we see him winning again, getting those official World Golf Rankings points, and possibly even working his way back into majors, which again would just take this story to the next level. There's a lot still to watch. So make sure you guys subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you in the next one.